The day Damien Carter disappeared, he didn't leave a note. He didn't call. He didn't even look back. Just hours after his exhausted wife, Naomi Bennett, gave birth to their first child, he walked out of the hospital holding another woman's hand, abandoning the woman who had loved him through every struggle and leaving his helpless newborn without a father. For months, Naomi endured sleepless nights, unpaid bills, endless whispers, and the crushing pain of raising her baby alone. While Damien flaunted his new relationship, his parents mocked Naomi as a burden, convinced she had nothing left to offer their influential family. They believed she was weak, powerless, and desperate enough to accept whatever they demanded. Then, without warning, Damien returned. But he didn't come back to apologize. He arrived with expensive lawyers, stacks of legal documents, and one ruthless demand. Naomi must sign away every right she had to his family's fortune, their properties, and any future claims. Surrounded by his arrogant parents and confident that the broken woman before them had no choice, they pressured her to sign immediately. Naomi calmly accepted the court hearing. What none of them knew was that the quiet, heartbroken mother they had humiliated had been living with a secret so extraordinary that revealing it would shake their entire world. Long before Damien ever abandoned her, Naomi had become the hidden billionaire owner of the $50 billion trust that silently controlled every major asset his family believed they owned. When the judge opened the confidential trust records and revealed the identity of the true owner in a courtroom packed with lawyers, executives, and stunned relatives, silence swallowed the room. Faces turned pale. Hands began to shake. Damien's confidence disappeared in an instant as his entire family realized they had just tried to strip everything away from the one woman who legally owned it all. 3 years earlier, long before betrayal shattered her marriage, Naomi Bennett had never cared about wealth or status. She believed that love, loyalty, and honesty were the only riches a family truly needed. She met Damien Carter at a charity fundraising event where he volunteered on behalf of his family's investment company. Unlike the wealthy businessmen surrounding him, Damien appeared humble, attentive, and sincere. He admired Naomi's kindness toward children and the elderly far more than her beauty, though everyone noticed she possessed both. Their relationship grew steadily. Damien often complained that his parents, Victor Carter and Evelyn Carter, measured success only by money. Naomi encouraged him to value character instead. When Damien proposed, Naomi accepted without hesitation. Unknown to him, however, Naomi carried a burden she had promised never to reveal. Years earlier, her late grandfather, Gabriel Bennett, had founded an international trust whose investments quietly expanded across banking, shipping, energy, aviation, technology, and commercial real estate. Before his death, he entrusted ownership of the entire organization to Naomi through an irreversible legal structure. His final instruction echoed in her heart. Never tell anyone until you know they love you more than your wealth. Naomi honored that promise. She chose a simple career, drove an ordinary car, and lived modestly despite legally controlling assets valued at more than $50 billion. Only 3 people knew the truth. The chairman of the trust, its chief legal advisor, and the family attorney who had drafted her grandfather's will. Even they addressed Naomi simply as Madam Owner during confidential meetings. After marrying Damien, Naomi continued hiding her identity. She wanted their marriage to be built on genuine love rather than unimaginable wealth. For a time, it seemed she had chosen wisely. The couple rented a comfortable home instead of purchasing a mansion. Naomi cooked nearly every meal herself. They laughed together over inexpensive dates, watched old movies on rainy evenings, and dreamed about the children they hoped to raise. Whenever Damien worried about money, Naomi quietly supported him without exposing her fortune. Anonymous investors repeatedly rescued projects that Damien believed had succeeded because of luck. He never discovered those investors worked for Naomi. Everything changed after Victor Carter persuaded Damien to join the family's expanding financial empire. Victor considered Naomi beneath the Carter family's reputation. "She has no influential surname," he repeatedly told his son. "No fortune, no powerful connections. You could have married into real wealth." Evelyn Carter agreed. She criticized Naomi's clothes. She mocked her modest lifestyle. She complained that Naomi's quiet nature embarrassed their wealthy social circle. Naomi endured every insult with remarkable patience. She refused to argue. She refused to expose her true position. She simply smiled and treated them with kindness they neither deserved nor appreciated. Months later, Naomi discovered she was pregnant. She expected the news to unite the family. Instead, it widened every crack already forming inside the marriage. Victor became increasingly determined that Damien deserved someone more suitable. Around that same time, Damien met Vanessa Holloway, a glamorous entrepreneur whose confidence and luxurious lifestyle immediately impressed the Carter family. Vanessa enjoyed expensive vacations, designer jewelry, and exclusive parties. Victor and Evelyn openly welcomed her into family gatherings. At first, Damien insisted she was merely a business associate. Naomi believed him. She trusted her husband completely. But subtle changes soon became impossible to ignore. Damien stayed out later than usual. Phone calls ended the moment Naomi entered the room. Business trips became more frequent. His affection slowly disappeared, replaced by impatience and emotional distance. One evening, while folding tiny baby clothes in the nursery, Naomi gently asked whether something was wrong. Damien barely looked at her. "I'm under pressure," he replied coldly. "Stop overthinking everything." She apologized, though she had done nothing wrong. Deep inside, however, she felt a growing fear she could not explain. Weeks later, Naomi attended a charity banquet where Victor deliberately introduced Vanessa as the woman who truly understands Damien's future. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Naomi stood silently beside her husband, waiting for him to correct the humiliating remark. He never did. Instead, Damien remained silent while Vanessa smiled confidently. That single moment broke something inside Naomi's heart. Still, she chose forgiveness. She believed their unborn child deserved parents who fought for their marriage instead of abandoning it. She had no idea that the greatest betrayal of her life was only weeks away, and that every insult, every act of humiliation, and every cruel decision made against her was leading the Carter family toward the day they would discover that the woman they considered worthless was, in fact, the legal owner of the fortune sustaining their entire empire. The weeks leading up to Naomi's delivery should have been filled with excitement, laughter, and hopeful anticipation. Instead, they became the loneliest days of her life. Damien grew more distant with each passing day. He rarely joined Naomi for prenatal appointments, claiming urgent meetings and unexpected business trips. Even when he was home, his attention remained fixed on his phone. Messages appeared constantly, followed by hurried exits from the room whenever it rang. Naomi noticed everything. She noticed the expensive cologne he had never worn before. She noticed the unfamiliar smile that appeared whenever he read certain messages. Most painfully, she noticed how the man who once couldn't wait to become a father now spoke about the baby as though it were an obligation instead of a blessing. Still, she refused to accuse him without proof. Every night, she placed one hand on her growing stomach and whispered to the child inside her, "Your father will remember who he is. Families survive difficult seasons." She believed those words because she needed to. Victor and Evelyn Carter, however, had no intention of helping their son's marriage survive. They openly invited Vanessa Holloway to family dinners, business receptions, and charity galas. At one gathering, Evelyn deliberately asked Vanessa to sit beside Damien while Naomi was seated several places away among distant relatives. When Naomi quietly approached her mother-in-law afterward, Evelyn offered no apology. "You should get used to disappointment," she said coldly. "Some women simply aren't enough for successful men." Naomi walked away without responding. She refused to give Evelyn the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Only when she reached her car did the tears finally come. Days later, labor began unexpectedly. Damien drove her to the hospital, but his concern seemed strangely forced. Throughout the journey, he kept checking his phone instead of focusing on his wife. Several hours later, after a long and exhausting delivery, Naomi gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The nurse carefully placed the newborn in her trembling arms. For the first time in months, Naomi smiled without sadness. She kissed her son's tiny forehead. "You'll always be loved," she whispered. She looked around the room. Damien was gone. At first, she assumed he had stepped outside to make a phone call. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. Another hour. A nurse finally returned, carrying Damien's overnight bag. "Your husband asked someone to collect his belongings," she explained gently. "He said he had an emergency." Naomi nodded weakly. Surely he would return. He had to. But he never did. The following morning, her phone vibrated. Instead of a message asking about his son, Damien had sent only a brief text. "I need time, don't contact me." Naomi stared at the words until the screen blurred through her tears. Before she could process them, social media erupted. Photographs showed Damien boarding a private yacht with Vanessa Holloway on the very night their son had been born. Another image showed them embracing beneath a sunset, while entertainment blogs described them as the city's newest power couple. The dates left no room for misunderstanding. While Naomi lay recovering from childbirth, Damien had chosen another woman. News spread quickly. Neighbors whispered. Former friends avoided uncomfortable conversations. Victor and Evelyn made no attempt to defend their daughter-in-law. Instead, they quietly encouraged the rumors that Naomi had driven Damien away through jealousy and insecurity. 3 days later, Naomi carried her newborn home alone. No husband greeted her. No celebration filled the house. Only silence. Bills soon began arriving. Hospital expenses, mortgage payments, insurance notices. The savings Damien had promised would cover their family were nearly exhausted. Unknown to Naomi, Damien had emptied several joint accounts before disappearing. Even then, she refused to touch a single dollar belonging to the Bennett Trust. She had inherited that fortune to protect it, not to solve personal heartbreak. Instead, she returned to part-time consulting work from home while caring for her son between sleepless nights. Every morning, she rocked her baby to sleep before opening her laptop. Every evening, she closed it only after finishing another confidential board meeting with executives who knew her only as the anonymous owner behind encrypted video calls. Not one of them realized the woman approving multi-billion-dollar investments was simultaneously warming baby bottles in a modest kitchen. Months passed. Damien never called. He never asked about his son. Not once did he send child support or even a birthday card. Yet the Carter family business continued expanding. Victor proudly announced new acquisitions, unaware that the financing behind several of those transactions had been quietly approved by the very woman they had abandoned. Naomi could have destroyed their empire with a single instruction. She never did. She believed revenge born from anger only created more pain. Instead, she focused on raising her son with dignity. One rainy afternoon, as she tucked her sleeping baby into his crib, the chairman of the Bennett Trust called through the secure line. "Madam Owner," he said respectfully, "we've uncovered something concerning. The Carter family has been using several trust-backed assets as collateral. They appear to believe those holdings belong to them outright." Naomi frowned. "They don't. They never have. Legally, every one of those assets remains under your ownership through the trust." She was silent. "If they attempt to transfer or seize those properties," the chairman continued, "they'll eventually discover the truth." Naomi looked toward her sleeping son. "I don't want conflict," she replied quietly. "You may not have a choice." She ended the call with an uneasy feeling. For the first time since Damien walked out of the hospital, Naomi sensed that the quiet life she had fought to preserve was about to collide with the secret she had guarded for years. And somewhere across the city, Damien Carter was preparing to return, not to seek forgiveness, but to demand everything he believed belonged to him. 6 months after walking out of the hospital, Damien Carter finally stood outside Naomi's front door. There were no flowers in his hands, no gifts for the son he had never met, no expression of regret. Parked along the quiet street were 3 luxury vehicles. Damien stepped out of the first one wearing an expensive tailored suit. Behind him came Victor Carter, Evelyn Carter, Vanessa Holloway, and 2 sharply dressed attorneys carrying thick leather briefcases. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as the group confidently approached Naomi's modest home. One of the attorneys rang the bell. Naomi opened the door with her son resting peacefully in her arms. For several seconds, silence hung between them. The baby looked curiously at the stranger standing before him. Damien barely acknowledged the little boy. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi. "You've been difficult to reach," he said flatly. Naomi answered calmly. "You disappeared." Victor stepped forward before Damien could speak again. "We're not here to discuss the past." Naomi looked at him. "That's interesting, because the past is standing right in front of me." Evelyn rolled her eyes. "Always dramatic." Vanessa folded her arms, wearing a smile that suggested she had already won. One attorney cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter, we've come to resolve several legal matters." Naomi gently corrected him. "I still haven't decided whether I'll remain Mrs. Carter." The lawyer ignored the comment. He removed a thick stack of documents. "These agreements settle the marital estate, waive future claims, surrender inheritance rights connected to the Carter family, and confirm that you will have no financial interest in any Carter-owned businesses or assets." Naomi glanced at the first page. There were dozens more beneath it. She quietly asked one question. "Why now?" Damien finally answered. "Our investors are restructuring ownership. My lawyers say we need everything finalized before the merger." Naomi slowly closed the folder. "So after abandoning your wife and newborn son, the first reason you come back is because paperwork became inconvenient." Damien's expression hardened. "Don't make this emotional." Naomi almost laughed. "You left me in a hospital after I gave birth." Victor interrupted impatiently. "This conversation is wasting everyone's time." He pointed toward the documents. "Sign them." Naomi remained perfectly composed. "No." The single word stunned them. Evelyn's face tightened. "You have no leverage." Naomi looked at her peacefully. "I wasn't aware this was a negotiation." Vanessa stepped closer. "Listen carefully. Damien has moved on. Everyone knows we're getting married. You're only embarrassing yourself by delaying the inevitable." Naomi looked directly into Vanessa's eyes. "I'm not delaying anything." She handed the folder back. "I'm simply refusing to sign documents I haven't reviewed." One attorney adjusted his glasses. "That's your legal right." Victor shot the lawyer an irritated look. "We don't have time for this." Naomi spoke firmly. "Then perhaps you shouldn't have come unprepared." Damien's patience disappeared. "You own nothing." He pointed around the modest living room. "You can barely afford this place. You have no business experience. You have no influence. You have no future connected to my family. So stop pretending you have options." Naomi listened quietly. When he finished, she asked another simple question. "Are you finished?" Damien looked confused. She continued, "Because if you're finished insulting me, I'd like you to leave." Victor stepped forward angrily. "You don't seem to understand. Our family's holdings are worth billions. Our legal team can keep you in court for years. You'll lose everything." Naomi calmly shifted her sleeping son onto her shoulder. "Everything." Victor smiled confidently. "Everything." Naomi looked at the little boy sleeping peacefully against her. "I already have everything that matters." For a brief moment, even one of the attorneys seemed uncomfortable. The older lawyer quietly closed his briefcase. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "perhaps we should allow Mrs. Carter adequate time to obtain independent counsel." Victor glared at him. "No." Damien agreed. "If she won't sign voluntarily, we'll file immediately." Naomi nodded. "Please do." The answer surprised everyone. Vanessa frowned. "You actually want to go to court?" Naomi smiled faintly. "If that's where the truth belongs, then that's where we'll meet." Victor laughed. "You honestly believe a judge will side with you?" Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the front door and held it open. "I think this meeting is over." Damien hesitated. For the first time since arriving, something about Naomi unsettled him. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She wasn't negotiating. She wasn't even angry. She looked certain. As the Carter family drove away, Damien looked back through the rear window. Naomi was still standing in the doorway holding their son. She watched them leave without a trace of fear. That evening, Victor convened an emergency meeting at Carter Holdings. "Our attorneys will file tomorrow," he announced. "The sooner she's forced to sign, the sooner the merger proceeds." Across the conference table, executives nodded. One senior financial officer hesitated before speaking. "Sir, there is one issue." Victor frowned. "What issue?" "The trust-backed assets." Victor waved dismissively. "They're ours." The executive swallowed nervously. "I've requested updated ownership confirmations several times. The trust administrators keep refusing access." Victor slammed his hand on the table. "Then pressure them. They answer to us." The room fell silent. No one had the courage to tell him they weren't certain that was true. Meanwhile, across town, Naomi placed her son in his crib before opening a secure laptop hidden inside a locked cabinet. Within seconds, encrypted screens connected her to the board of the Bennett Trust. The chairman appeared first. "So they've made their move." Naomi nodded. "They're filing suit." Several directors exchanged knowing glances. The chief legal advisor leaned forward. "Madam Owner, once litigation begins, the court will require certified ownership records." Naomi remained silent. The advisor continued. "That means your identity as the beneficial owner of the $50 billion trust, can no longer remain confidential. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Her grandfather's promise had protected her for years. Now the law itself would reveal what she had never wanted anyone to know. She opened her eyes. Then prepare every document. The chairman smiled respectfully. Yes, Madam Owner. For the first time, the Carter family is about to discover whose empire they've been living on. Far across the city, Damien poured himself a glass of champagne, convinced victory was only weeks away. He had no idea that every legal document his lawyers were preparing was bringing him closer to the single courtroom hearing that would destroy everything his family believed they owned. The courthouse was already crowded when Naomi Bennett arrived. She wore a simple navy blue suit, her hair neatly tied back, and carried no designer handbag or expensive jewelry. To everyone watching, she looked like an ordinary single mother preparing to defend herself against a powerful family. Across the hallway, Damien Carter entered surrounded by Victor Carter, Evelyn Carter, Vanessa Holloway, and a team of attorneys. Reporters whispered among themselves, "That's the abandoned wife. I heard she doesn't stand a chance." The Carter family owns half the city's financial district. Victor smiled confidently as cameras flashed. "This should be over before lunch," he muttered. Naomi said nothing. She quietly greeted her attorney, Margaret Ellis, a seasoned lawyer who had represented the Bennett Trust for nearly 20 years. "Are you ready?" Margaret asked softly. Naomi nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside the courtroom, the judge called the case to order. Damien's lead attorney rose first. "Your Honor, this matter concerns the dissolution of the parties' marriage and the division of property. We also request declarations confirming that Mrs. Carter has no ownership interest in the Carter family's businesses, investment companies, or trust-backed assets." The judge nodded. "Proceed." For nearly an hour, Damien's legal team presented documents describing the Carter family's corporate structure and financial interests. Victor sat proudly, convinced the outcome was inevitable. When they finished, Margaret Ellis stood. "Your Honor, before addressing the requested declarations, we ask the court to admit certified ownership records concerning the assets referenced throughout the petition." Damien's attorney frowned. "What relevance do those records have?" Margaret answered calmly. "They establish who actually owns the assets upon which the petition is based." The judge reviewed the request. "Admitted." Several sealed binders were delivered to the bench. Each carried official certifications from independent trustees, auditors, and financial custodians. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. Margaret continued. "The petition repeatedly describes these holdings as Carter family assets. We respectfully submit that this description is incomplete." Victor leaned toward Damien. "She's bluffing." Margaret opened the first binder. These records show that numerous commercial buildings, investment portfolios, shipping interests, and financing agreements referenced by the petition are held through the Bennett Legacy Trust. Damien's attorney immediately objected. "The Bennett Trust is not a party to this action." Margaret nodded. "Correct. However, the petition asks this court to determine ownership of property that belongs to that trust." The judge looked down at the certified documents. "I'll allow the testimony." One by one, financial experts explained the ownership structure. The trust had existed for decades. It legally owned controlling interests in multiple companies. It had financed several Carter business expansions through long-term agreements. The Carter family managed certain businesses, but many of the underlying assets remained owned by the trust itself. Victor's confidence began to fade. He whispered urgently to his attorney, "Why didn't anyone tell me this?" The attorney answered honestly, "We believed the ownership structure was exactly as represented in the corporate summaries." Margaret then made her final request. "Your Honor, because ownership has become central to this dispute, we ask permission to identify the trust's beneficial owner." The courtroom became silent. The judge reviewed another sealed envelope before speaking. Permission granted. Margaret walked toward the witness stand. For privacy reasons, the Bennett Legacy Trust has operated through confidential ownership arrangements permitted under applicable law. Today, however, that confidentiality must yield because ownership has become directly relevant to the claims before this court. She turned toward Naomi. "Mrs. Bennett, would you please stand?" Every head in the courtroom turned. Damien looked confused. Victor frowned. Evelyn stared in disbelief. Margaret spoke clearly. The certified records before this court establish that Naomi Bennett is the sole beneficial owner of the Bennett Legacy Trust. For several seconds, no one moved. Margaret continued. "The current estimated value of trust-controlled assets exceeds $50 billion. Gasps echoed throughout the gallery. Reporters hurriedly scribbled notes. Damien slowly shook his head. "No, that's impossible." Margaret calmly handed another certified document to the court. "The ownership records have been independently verified." The judge examined each page carefully before returning them. "The court accepts these records as authentic for purposes of today's proceedings." Victor gripped the edge of the counsel table. "If she owns the trust." He couldn't finish the sentence. His own attorney answered quietly. "Then many of the assets referenced in our petition were never owned by your family in the way we believed." Vanessa's confident smile disappeared. She stared at Naomi, remembering every insult she had ever spoken. Naomi remained exactly as she had throughout the hearing. Calm, respectful, silent. She took no pleasure in watching the Carter family struggle to absorb the truth. The judge addressed both legal teams. "This court will recess until tomorrow morning. Counsel are directed to review today's evidence and be prepared to address its effect on the remaining issues in this case." The gavel struck. As everyone began leaving the courtroom, Damien finally looked directly at Naomi. For the first time since abandoning her at the hospital, he saw not the woman he had underestimated, but the woman whose quiet strength had carried her through betrayal without once seeking revenge. And he realized that the greatest mistake of his life had not been losing a fortune. It had been walking away from the only person who had truly loved him before anyone knew what she possessed. The morning after the courtroom hearing, the Carter family gathered inside the executive boardroom of Carter Holdings. No one spoke. Victor Carter sat at the head of the polished conference table, staring at a stack of legal documents that had arrived before dawn. His hands, once steady with confidence, now trembled ever so slightly as he turned another page. Across from him, Damien looked exhausted. He had barely slept. He could still hear Margaret Ellis's words echoing through his mind. Naomi Bennett is the sole beneficial owner of the Bennett Legacy Trust. The sentence refused to leave him. For years, he had believed Naomi was an ordinary woman who had little to contribute beyond her love and support. Now every memory replayed differently. The times she had quietly encouraged him during financial crises. The mysterious investors who had rescued failing projects. The opportunities that had appeared just when the family business seemed ready to collapse. None of it had been luck. Victor finally broke the silence. "There has to be a mistake." The company's chief financial officer carefully adjusted his glasses. We've spent the entire night reviewing the ownership records. He paused before continuing. There isn't a mistake. He projected several documents onto the large screen. These buildings, the commercial logistics centers, the shipping terminals, and several investment funds we've treated as permanent family assets. He looked directly at Victor. They've all been held by the Bennett Legacy Trust from the beginning. The room fell silent. Another executive spoke. Our company has management rights over some operations through long-term agreements, but ownership is different. Victor slammed his fist against the table. Why didn't anyone discover this years ago? The chief legal officer answered honestly. Because the trust honored every agreement. They never interfered. They never challenged your management. They simply allowed the contracts to continue. Damien lowered his head. Naomi had possessed every legal opportunity to expose them. She never had. Instead, she had protected the business that continually humiliated her. Across town, Naomi sat in the Bennett Trust headquarters for the first time in months. Unlike the modest house where she lived with her son, the headquarters occupied the top floors of a modern glass tower overlooking the city. Senior executives rose respectfully as she entered. No cameras were present. No reporters waited outside. The meeting remained entirely private. The chairman welcomed her warmly. Madam Owner. Naomi smiled politely. Please, call me Naomi. The chairman returned the smile. Old habits are difficult to break. He handed her a detailed report. The Carter family has requested emergency negotiations. Naomi quietly read the first page. Damien wished to withdraw several claims. Victor requested mediation. Their attorneys hoped to avoid further litigation. Naomi placed the report on the table. What do you recommend? The chief legal advisor answered carefully. The decision is yours. You've always instructed us to protect the trust without seeking unnecessary conflict. Naomi looked through the glass windows toward the city below. My grandfather built this trust to preserve opportunity, not to destroy families. The chairman nodded. Then how would you like to proceed? Naomi answered after a long silence. We'll honor every lawful agreement. We won't punish anyone simply because we can. The executives exchanged respectful glances. Her response reflected exactly why Gabriel Bennett had chosen her as his successor. Power had never changed her character. Meanwhile, Damien drove alone to the small neighborhood where Naomi still lived. He remained inside his car for nearly 20 minutes before gathering enough courage to approach the front door. When Naomi opened it, she looked neither surprised nor angry. She simply waited. Damien spoke quietly. I didn't come with lawyers. I know. I didn't come to argue. Naomi remained silent. His eyes drifted toward the little boy playing on the living room floor with wooden blocks. For several moments, neither father nor son recognized the significance of the other. Tears filled Damien's eyes. Does he? He struggled to finish. Does he know who I am? Naomi answered honestly. He's too young. Damien swallowed hard. I've missed everything. The first smile. The first laugh. The first word. Naomi nodded gently. You did. He lowered his head. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. She listened without interrupting. I convinced myself that success mattered more than loyalty. I allowed my parents to influence every decision. I abandoned the two people who needed me most. His voice broke. I've spent months blaming everyone except myself. Naomi looked at him steadily. Regret is painful. It should be. Damien slowly nodded. I know. I can't change what I've done. No, Naomi replied. You can't. A long silence settled between them. Finally, Damien spoke again. I've already instructed my attorneys to withdraw every demand against you. I'm not asking for your money. I'm asking for one chance to become a father. Naomi looked toward her son. The little boy laughed as he stacked another wooden block onto his growing tower. Children understood nothing about billion-dollar trusts. They only understood love. She turned back to Damien. If you're sincere, prove it with consistency. Not promises, not speeches, actions. Damien nodded through tears. I will. Naomi stepped aside. You may come inside. As Damien entered the home he had abandoned months earlier, he realized the greatest privilege before him wasn't access to unimaginable wealth. It was the possibility, however uncertain, of earning a place in his son's life. Outside, reporters continued speculating about fortunes, trusts, and court battles. Inside the quiet living room, none of those things mattered. Only the choices each person would make from that day forward would determine whether the Carter family could ever rebuild what their pride had destroyed. The courthouse was quieter than it had been the previous day, but the anticipation was even greater. News of the Bennett Legacy Trust had spread across the financial world overnight. Investors, journalists, and business leaders filled the public gallery, eager to learn how the dispute would end. Naomi entered, carrying herself with the same quiet dignity she had shown from the beginning. She neither sought attention nor avoided it. Damien arrived several minutes later, no longer surrounded by the confidence that had once defined him. Victor and Evelyn followed behind him, their expressions marked by sleepless nights and hard lessons. When the judge entered, the courtroom immediately fell silent. After reviewing the filings submitted overnight, the judge began speaking. The court has carefully considered the evidence presented by both parties, including the certified ownership records, the marital claims, and the requests made by counsel following yesterday's proceedings. The judge turned toward Damien's attorney. The petition seeking declarations over assets belonging to the Bennett Legacy Trust has been withdrawn. The attorney stood. Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded before continuing. Based on the evidence before this court, the trust remains separate from these proceedings. Nothing in today's ruling alters its lawful ownership or governance. Victor slowly lowered his head. Years of assumptions had collapsed in a matter of hours. The judge then addressed the remaining issues. As to the dissolution of the marriage and related matters, the court directs that all outstanding financial obligations owed to Mrs. Bennett and the party's child be satisfied in accordance with the law. Damien stood. Your Honor. The judge looked toward him. I accept full responsibility for my actions. The courtroom became silent. I abandoned my wife after the birth of our son. I failed to support my child. I allowed pride and outside influence to destroy my family. He turned toward Naomi. I cannot undo the pain I caused, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to become the father my son deserves. No one interrupted him. There was nothing left to argue. The judge concluded the hearing. The court encourages both parties to place the welfare of their child above every remaining disagreement. With a single strike of the gavel, the case was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed toward Naomi. "Mrs. Bennett, did you intend to hide your identity forever? Will you take control of the Carter businesses? Will you seek damages?" Naomi paused before answering. "My grandfather taught me that wealth is measured by what you protect, not by what you possess." She smiled gently. "The trust exists to build businesses, create opportunities, and honor commitments. It was never created to satisfy revenge." Without another word, she walked to her waiting car. Several weeks later, the Bennett Legacy Trust announced a renewed investment program supporting hospitals, scholarships, affordable housing, and small business development. The headlines surprised many observers. Rather than using her fortune to punish those who had wronged her, Naomi chose to strengthen the communities her grandfather had always cared about. Meanwhile, Carter Holdings underwent significant restructuring. Victor resigned as chairman, acknowledging that years of arrogance had nearly destroyed both his family and the company. Before leaving the headquarters for the final time, he quietly visited Naomi. "I judged you by appearances," he admitted. "I believed kindness was weakness." Naomi answered calmly. "Kindness becomes weakness only when it abandons wisdom." Victor nodded slowly. "I understand that now." Even Evelyn, whose harsh words had wounded Naomi countless times, eventually requested a private meeting. With tears in her eyes, she apologized. "I spent years believing status mattered more than character." Naomi listened. Then she simply replied, "I hope you found something more valuable." For the first time in many years, Evelyn had no answer. Months passed. Damien kept every promise he had made. He attended every scheduled visit. He never missed a birthday, a school event, or a doctor's appointment. He asked for nothing beyond the opportunity to know his son. Trust did not return overnight. It had to be earned one choice at a time. Naomi never promised that their marriage could be restored. Some wounds run too deep. But she never stood between a sincere father and a child who deserved to know him. One sunny afternoon, Damien sat in a park, helping his little boy build a model airplane. The child laughed as it glided across the grass. Naomi watched from a nearby bench. For the first time in years, there was peace. Not because billions of dollars had changed hands. Not because anyone had won a legal battle. But because truth had finally replaced deception, humility had replaced pride, and responsibility had replaced excuses. As the sun began to set, Naomi remembered the final words her grandfather had spoken to her. "Never measure a person's worth by what they own. Measure it by what remains when everything they own could disappear." She smiled softly. The Carter family had once believed their greatest treasure was the fortune they thought they controlled. Only after nearly losing everything did they discover that integrity, loyalty, and love were worth far more than any trust, company, or fortune could ever buy. And that lesson would remain their greatest inheritance for the rest of their lives.